Chicago, Illinois, October 7th, 2023, 9:15 p.m. The dining room was a battlefield. Stephanie's wine glass lay shattered on the hardwood floor, the red liquid pooling around her feet like blood. Her face was a mix of disbelief and fury, her chest heaving with each ragged breath. Across from her, Lucy sat frozen, her polished facade cracked. For the first time, she didn't have a smug retort or a sly smile. "You're a monster," Stephanie spat, her voice shaking. How long? How long have you been doing this?" Lucy's lips pressed into a thin line. "Stephanie, you're overreacting." "Don't," I interrupted, slamming my fist on the table. My voice was louder than I intended, and it startled even me. "Don't you dare gaslight her. Not this time." Lucy's eyes narrowed, her composure slipping further. "Watch your tone. You're still a guest in my house." "A guest?" I shot back, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "That's rich coming from you. I've been nothing but a pawn in your sick games since the day I met Stephanie." "Games?" Stephanie repeated, her voice breaking. She turned to me, tears glistening in her eyes. "What games? What are you talking about?" I hesitated. Saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff. But there was no turning back now. "She's been manipulating me," I said finally. "Making comments, twisting situations, planting doubts. And not just me, everyone in this family. She's been pulling the strings for years." Stephanie's face twisted with confusion. "Mom." Lucy sighed dramatically, standing up and brushing imaginary crumbs from her dress. "Oh, for heaven's sake. You're making it sound like I'm some kind of villain." "Because you are," I snapped. "You've been controlling Stephanie, me, even your husband. Don't act like we're imagining this." Stephanie's father, who had been silently sipping his scotch in the corner, cleared his throat. His eyes were tired, heavy with years of unspoken truths. "He's not wrong, Steph," he said quietly. Stephanie's head whipped toward him. "Dad, what are you saying?" He sighed, setting his glass down with a thud. "Your mother has always been particular. About everything. About everyone. And when she doesn't get her way, she makes sure no one else does either." Lucy's face darkened. "Don't you dare turn on me, Richard." "Oh, so now I'm allowed to speak?" Richard shot back, his tone sharper than I'd ever heard. "Because for years, you've made damn sure my voice didn't matter in this house." Stephanie looked between her parents, her voice trembling. "What is happening right now? Dad, why are you saying this?" Richard's gaze softened as he looked at her. "Because it's the truth. Lucy has controlled this family for years, and we've all been too scared or too beaten down to stand up to her." "Scared?" Lucy scoffed, her voice rising. "You're being ridiculous. Everything I've done has been for this family, for you, for Stephanie." "No," I said firmly. "Everything you've done has been for yourself." Lucy turned to me, her eyes blazing. "And what would you know about family? You're just some outsider who barely knows what it means to be part of something greater." "I know manipulation when I see it," I fired back. "And you've been manipulating Stephanie from the start. You've been trying to sabotage our relationship, and when that didn't work, you turned your attention to me." "Sabotage?" Stephanie said, her voice climbing in pitch. "Mom, is that true?" Lucy threw her hands up, laughing bitterly. "Oh, please. Do you really think I need to sabotage anything? If your relationship is so fragile, that's on you, not me." "Stop deflecting," I shouted, standing now. "Own up to what you've done. The comments, the games, the lies. You've been playing us all against each other." Stephanie stepped back, her face pale. "Comments? Lies? What is he talking about, Mom?" Lucy crossed her arms, her gaze icy. "I've done nothing but try to help you, Stephanie. If he feels threatened by that, maybe he's the problem, not me." "That's enough," Richard said, his voice booming across the room. "Stop turning this around, Lucy. He's right. You've been meddling for years, and it's time you faced the consequences." Stephanie's jaw dropped. "Dad, how can you say that?" "Because it's true," Richard said, his voice cracking. I've stayed quiet for too long, Steph. I let her get away with it because it was easier than fighting. But it's time you knew who your mother really is. Don't you dare, Lucy began, but Richard cut her off. Enough, he roared. You've been controlling everything. Our marriage, our family, even this house, for decades. And I'm done pretending it's normal. Lucy's composure shattered. Her voice rose to a shrill pitch as she turned to Stephanie. And you're going to believe him? Over me? After everything I've done for you? Stephanie shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I don't know what to believe anymore. You're my mom. How could you do this? Lucy took a step forward, her voice softening. Sweetheart, I was only trying to protect you, to make sure you were surrounded by the right people. The right people? I interjected. You mean people you can control, people who won't stand up to you. Stephanie looked at me, her voice barely a whisper. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I didn't know how, I admitted. I thought you wouldn't believe me. And honestly, I wasn't sure I could handle the fallout. Well, congratulations, Lucy sneered. You've handled it. You've ruined everything. No, Mom, Stephanie said, her voice trembling but strong. You did that. You ruined this family. Lucy's face contorted with rage, but she didn't respond. The room fell into an uneasy silence, the weight of years of manipulation and deceit finally coming to light. Stephanie turned to me, her expression pained. I need time to process this. All of it. I nodded, my heart heavy. Take all the time you need. She turned back to her parents, her voice cracking. I don't know if I can ever forgive you. Lucy's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, she looked small, defeated. Richard sighed deeply, his gaze fixed on the floor. I'm sorry, Steph. I should have said something sooner. Stephanie didn't reply. She simply walked out of the room, leaving the rest of us in stunned silence. And just like that, the carefully constructed facade of the Hadley family was shattered, leaving nothing but raw, unvarnished truth in its wake. Chicago, Illinois, October 7th, 2023, 10:15 p.m. The house was unnaturally quiet after Stephanie left the room. The sound of her footsteps faded down the hallway, and the distant slam of the front door reverberated through the air like a final nail in the coffin. I sat back down, my hands trembling as I reached for my water glass. Lucy stood frozen by the table, her face pale but her jaw clenched, her carefully crafted mask slipping away entirely. Well, she said finally, her voice razor sharp, I hope you're proud of yourself. You've torn this family apart. Don't put this on me. I shot back, my voice steadier than I felt. This is all on you, Lucy. Everything that happened tonight is because of you. Her eyes narrowed. You're awfully bold for someone who's been here for all of 5 minutes. You don't know anything about this family. I know enough, I said. I know you've been manipulating Stephanie, planting seeds of doubt, trying to control every aspect of her life. And it's not just her, is it? You've been doing this to everyone. Stop it, Richard said, his voice firm but quiet. Lucy turned on him, her fury blazing. Don't you dare defend him, Richard. You've been spineless for years, letting me take the reins because you couldn't be bothered to deal with the real world. Richard didn't flinch. I let you take the reins because you wouldn't let anyone else near them. You've pushed everyone away, Lucy. Your friends, your family, even your own daughter. That's not true, she snapped, but there was no conviction in her voice. It is true, I said, standing again. You've isolated Stephanie so much that she can't even see what you're doing. But she knows now. You can't hide behind your lies anymore. Lucy's laugh was cold and brittle. You think one little outburst is going to change anything? Stephanie will come back. She always does. And when she does, she'll see you for what you really are, a troublemaker who doesn't belong here. I shook my head, my anger boiling over. You don't get it, do you? This isn't about me. It's about you and the damage you've done. Stephanie deserves better than this, better than you. Enough, Lucy screamed, slamming her hand on the table. The sound echoed in the quiet room, shocking both Richard and me into silence. For a moment, The only sound was Lucy's heavy breathing. Then, she straightened her back, smoothing the fabric of her dress as if nothing had happened. "You want to blame me?" she said, her voice eerily calm. "Fine, blame me. But let me tell you something. You'll never be enough for Stephanie. She'll realize that eventually, and when she does, you'll wish you had stayed quiet." Stephanie's perspective eye found Stephanie sitting in her car outside the house. Her hands were gripping the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white. The engine was off, and her gaze was fixed on the empty street ahead, but I could see the tears streaming down her face. I knocked softly on the window, and she jumped, startled. Her red-rimmed eyes met mine, and for a moment, I thought she might tell me to leave. Instead, she unlocked the door. I slid into the passenger seat, the silence between us heavy. "Are you okay?" I asked finally. She laughed bitterly, wiping at her cheeks. "What do you think?" I didn't know what to say. I had been preparing for this confrontation for months, but I hadn't anticipated how devastating it would be for Stephanie. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice soft. "For what?" she asked, her tone sharp. "For telling me the truth? For exposing my mom for what she really is? For waiting so long," I admitted. "I should have told you sooner. Maybe if I had, you wouldn't have to deal with this now." Stephanie sighed, leaning back in her seat. I don't understand. How could she do this? To me? To us? I thought she loved me." "She does," I said carefully, "but not in the way you need her to. She loves control more than anything, and she'll do whatever it takes to keep it." Stephanie's lip trembled, but she nodded. "You're right. I need time to process this." "Take all the time you need," I said. Back in the house, when I returned to the house, Richard was sitting alone in the living room, staring at an empty glass. Lucy was nowhere to be seen, and the eerie silence had returned. "She's upstairs," Richard said, noticing my glance toward the staircase. I sat down across from him, unsure of what to say. "I should have said something years ago," he said suddenly, his voice heavy with regret. "But every time I tried, she found a way to shut me down, to make me feel like I was the one in the wrong." "You're not the only one," I said. "She's been doing it to everyone." Richard nodded, his eyes glassy. "Stephanie deserves better than this, better than her. But I don't know if she'll ever be able to break free." "She will," I said firmly. "She's stronger than Lucy gives her credit for." "I hope you're right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The next morning, the following morning, I woke to the sound of raised voices. I stumbled out of bed and into the hallway, where I found Stephanie standing at the bottom of the stairs, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Mom, I'm not leaving until you tell me the truth," she said, her voice steady but strained. Lucy stood at the top of the stairs, her expression unreadable. "The truth about what?" "About everything," Stephanie said. "About why you've been manipulating me, lying to me, trying to control my life." Lucy descended the stairs slowly, her movements deliberate. "I've done nothing but protect you, Stephanie. If that's a crime, then so be it." "Protect me?" Stephanie repeated, her voice incredulous. "You've been controlling me, Mom. There's a difference." Lucy reached the bottom of the stairs, her gaze hard. "If you think I've been controlling you, then maybe you're not as strong as I thought you were." Stephanie flinched, but she didn't back down. "You don't get to do this anymore. You don't get to manipulate me, gaslight me, or anyone else in this family." Lucy's mask finally slipped, and her voice rose. "You ungrateful little—" "Enough!" Stephanie shouted, cutting her off. "I'm done. I'm done with you. If you can't admit what you've done, then I want nothing to do with you." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Lucy's expression twisted with rage, but before she could respond, Stephanie turned and walked out of the house, leaving us all in stunned silence once again. Chicago, Illinois, October 8th, 2023, 10:30 a.m. The morning sunlight filtered through the living room curtains, highlighting the tension that still lingered in the house. I sat on the couch, the weight of the previous night pressing heavily on my shoulders. Richard paced the room, running a hand through his thinning hair, while Lucy sat in an armchair, stone-faced and silent. "She's serious this time," Richard said, breaking the tense silence. "Stephanie's never walked out like that before." "She'll come back," Lucy said, her tone dismissive. "She just needs time to cool off." "No," I said, my voice firm. "She won't come back unless you take responsibility for what you've done." Lucy turned her icy glare on me. "And what exactly do you think I've done? Protected my daughter? Supported her when no one else would? Forgive me for caring." "Caring?" I scoffed. "This isn't caring, Lucy. This is manipulation. Control. You've spent years tearing people down to keep yourself on top." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out. But then her expression shifted into something colder. "You really think you know me? You're just a boy playing house with my daughter. You have no idea what I've done for this family." "Then tell us," Richard said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Lucy stiffened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I want to hear it," Richard said, crossing his arms. "All of it. No more lies, Lucy. No more games. What have you done? And why?" The confession for a moment, Lucy said nothing. She just sat there, her fingers drumming against the armrest of her chair. Then, slowly, she stood, smoothing the fabric of her blouse. "You want the truth?" she said, her voice calm but sharp. "Fine. I've done what I had to do to protect this family, to protect Stephanie, because God knows you wouldn't." Richard flinched but didn't respond. Lucy began to pace, her voice growing more animated. "Do you have any idea what it's like to raise a family in this world? To make sure your children have every opportunity, every advantage? I did what I had to do. I guided Stephanie, made sure she didn't waste her life on the wrong people, the wrong choices." She shot me a pointed look. "And what about me?" Richard asked, his voice quieter now. "Was that your excuse for controlling me too? For making me feel like a stranger in my own home?" Lucy's expression didn't falter. "You gave up control, Richard. I didn't take it. Someone had to keep this family together while you sat back and let life happen to you." "That's not fair," Richard said, his voice trembling. "No, what's not fair," Lucy snapped, "is being married to a man who never had the guts to lead. I had to make every decision, shoulder every burden, while you stood on the sidelines." "You didn't shoulder burdens," I interjected, my anger boiling over. "You crushed everyone around you to keep yourself in power, and now you've lost Stephanie because of it." Lucy rounded on me, her face twisted with rage. "Don't you dare lecture me about family. You don't know what it means to sacrifice for the people you love." "Sacrifice?" I said, my voice rising. "You didn't sacrifice anything. You took. You manipulated. And now you're standing here pretending it was all for Stephanie's sake when it was really about you." Stephanie's revelation before Lucy could respond. The front door opened, and Stephanie walked in. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with determination. "Stephanie," Lucy said, her voice softening instantly, "I'm so glad you're back." "Don't," Stephanie said sharply, holding up a hand. "Don't try to smooth this over, Mom. I've been thinking all night, and I realized something." Lucy hesitated. "What's that, sweetheart?" Stephanie took a deep breath, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You've always been like this, haven't you? You've always needed to control everything, everyone. I just didn't see it before." "That's not true," Lucy said quickly. "Yes, it is," Stephanie said, her voice growing stronger. "I started thinking about all the times you helped me, all the times you made decisions for me, told me who I should be friends with, who I should date. You weren't helping me, Mom. You were controlling me." Lucy's face paled. "Stephanie, and it's not just me," Stephanie continued, her voice breaking slightly. "It's Dad. It's him." She gestured toward me. "You've been manipulating all of us for years, and I'm done letting you do it." The tipping point, Lucy's composure cracked completely. "I did it for you," she shouted, her voice trembling with emotion. "Everything I've ever done was for you, to make sure you had the life you deserved. And this is how you repay me? Stephanie stepped closer, her expression hard. If controlling me is your idea of love, then I don't want it. I'm done, Mom. I'm done letting you run my life. Stephanie, please, Lucy said, her voice desperate now. You don't understand. No, Stephanie interrupted. You don't understand. I'm leaving. And until you're ready to take responsibility for what you've done, I don't want to hear from you. Lucy's face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. You don't mean that. I do, Stephanie said firmly. She turned to me, her eyes softening. Let's go. The fallout as we walked out the door, I glanced back at Richard. He looked older, smaller somehow, but he gave me a faint nod, as if to say, take care of her. Lucy, meanwhile, stood frozen in the middle of the room, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. In the car, Stephanie was quiet, staring out the window as the city passed by in a blur. Are you okay? I asked finally. She nodded slowly. I think so. It's just hard, you know? Realizing the person you trusted most isn't who you thought they were. I'm sorry, I said. I wish I could have done more to protect you. You did enough, she said softly. You told me the truth. That's what matters. As we drove away, I knew this was just the beginning. Lucy's hold on Stephanie, and all of us, was finally broken. But the road ahead would be long and filled with its own challenges. For now, though, we had each other. And that was enough. Chicago, Illinois, October 9th, 2023, 8 a.m. The morning after our departure, Stephanie sat across from me at the tiny breakfast table in my apartment, cradling a mug of coffee. Her normally bright eyes were clouded with exhaustion, her posture slumped in a way I'd never seen before. I don't even know where to start, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to figure it all out right now, I said gently. She looked up at me, a flicker of anger flashing in her eyes. I do, though. She's my mom. How do I just walk away from that? I hesitated, searching for the right words. Sometimes, walking away is the only way to make someone see how much they've hurt you. If you stay, she'll keep pulling the strings, and you'll never break free. Stephanie nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around the mug. I just don't know if she'll ever admit what she's done. She's too proud for that. She will, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Lucy's retaliation meanwhile, back at the Hadley house, Lucy was seething. Her carefully constructed world was unraveling, and she wasn't about to let it collapse without a fight. Richard found her in the living room, furiously typing on her laptop. What are you doing? He asked warily. Fixing this mess, she snapped, not looking up. Lucy, you can't control this, he said. Stephanie's made up her mind. She doesn't know what she's doing, Lucy said, her voice sharp. She's confused, manipulated by him. Richard shook his head. This isn't about him. This is about you, Lucy. You've been pushing her away for years, and now you're blaming everyone else. Lucy slammed the laptop shut, her eyes blazing. You're one to talk. You've been a spectator in this family for decades. Don't lecture me about responsibility. Richard's face hardened. I might have stayed quiet for too long, but not anymore. You're tearing this family apart, Lucy, and if you don't stop, you'll lose all of us. Stephanie's new resolve the next few days were a whirlwind of emotion for Stephanie. She alternated between anger and sadness, sometimes in the span of minutes. I tried to give her space, but one evening, she sat down beside me on the couch with a determined look in her eyes. I want to talk to my dad, she said. Are you sure? I asked. She nodded. He's the only one who ever tried to stand up to her. I need to hear his side of things. Maybe it'll help me understand how it got this bad. The meeting, Chicago, Illinois, October 11th, 2023, 6 p.m. Stephanie met Richard at a quiet cafe near his office. I stayed behind, knowing she needed to do this on her own. When she returned a few hours later, her face was a mixture of relief and heartbreak. He told me everything, she said, sinking onto the couch beside me. What did he say? She took a deep breath. He admitted that he let her control everything because it was easier than fighting her. He said he thought he was protecting me by staying quiet, but now he realizes that just made it worse. I reached for her hand. That must have been hard for him to say. It was, she said softly, but it helped. At least he's owning up to his part in this. Do you think your mom ever will? I asked cautiously. She hesitated, then shook her head. I don't know, but I'm not going to wait around for her to change. Lucy's last straw. A few days later, Lucy made her move. She showed up unannounced at my apartment, her presence as imposing as ever. You've done enough damage, she said the moment I opened the door. Lucy, I began, but she cut me off. No, I'm talking now, she said, stepping inside without an invitation. You think you've won? That you've turned Stephanie against me? Let me tell you something. I'll never let you take her from me. She's not something to take, I said, my voice rising. She's a person, and she's finally standing up for herself because she's tired of your control. Lucy's face twisted with fury. You don't know anything about what I've done for her. I've sacrificed everything to make sure she has the life she deserves. No, I said firmly. You've sacrificed her happiness to feed your own ego, and now you're watching it backfire. Stephanie appeared in the hallway, her eyes wide with disbelief. Mom, what are you doing here? Lucy turned to her, her voice softening. Sweetheart, I came to fix things. He's been poisoning you against me, and I couldn't stay silent anymore. Mom, stop, Stephanie said, her voice trembling. This isn't about him. It's about you. You've been controlling me for as long as I can remember, and I'm done letting you do it. Lucy reached for her, her eyes desperate. Please, Stephanie, don't do this. You're my daughter. I only want what's best for you. Stephanie stepped back, her expression hardening. Then let me live my life. Let me make my own decisions. And stop blaming everyone else for the mess you've made. Lucy's hand dropped to her side, and for the first time, she looked truly defeated. If that's what you want, she said quietly, then I'll go. She left without another word, the door closing softly behind her. A new chapter after Lucy's departure, the atmosphere in the apartment shifted. Stephanie seemed lighter, freer, as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She'll never admit she was wrong, will she? Stephanie asked one night as we sat on the couch. Probably not, I said honestly. But that doesn't mean you can't move forward. Stephanie nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. I think I'm ready to. For the first time in years, it felt like the start of something new. Chicago, Illinois, October 15th, 2023, 9 a.m. The days after Lucy's dramatic visit were quiet, but not peaceful. The tension in Stephanie's life had shifted from outright conflict to the slow unraveling of years of emotional manipulation. Each step forward came with its own pangs of doubt and grief. We spent that Sunday morning at the park near my apartment. The crisp autumn air carried the smell of damp leaves, and Stephanie absently kicked at the fallen foliage as we walked. I keep replaying her words, she admitted finally. How she said everything she did was for me. I took her hand gently. It's hard to untangle, I know, but that doesn't make it okay. She sighed. I know you're right, but part of me still feels guilty. Like I'm abandoning her. You're not abandoning her, I said firmly. You're setting boundaries. There's a difference. Stephanie gave me a faint smile. Boundaries. I'm not sure I've ever had those with her. Lucy's new tactics later that evening. As we curled up on the couch with a movie, Stephanie's phone buzzed on the coffee table. She glanced at the screen and frowned. It's her, she said, her voice tinged with apprehension. You don't have to answer, I reminded her. Stephanie hesitated before declining the call. Moments later, a text came through. I'm sorry for how I handled things. Can we talk, please? Stephanie stared at the message for a long moment before locking her phone and setting it down. Do you think she means it? She asked quietly. I think she'll say whatever she thinks will bring you back, I said carefully. Stephanie didn't reply, but her expression told me she was torn. Richard Stan the next day, Richard called Stephanie and asked to meet her for coffee. I encouraged her to go, knowing Richard's support was crucial in helping her break free from Lucy's grip. When Stephanie returned, she looked lighter, as if some of the weight she'd been carrying had shifted. "What did he say?" I asked as she sat down beside me. "He said he's proud of me," she said, a faint smile playing on her lips. "He told me he's sorry for not standing up to her sooner, and that he wishes he'd done more to protect me." "That must have been hard for him to admit," I said. "It was," she agreed, "but it meant a lot. For the first time, I feel like I'm not alone in this." Lucy's last attempt that evening, Stephanie received another message from Lucy. This time, it was more desperate. "I need to see you, Stephanie. Please. I know I've made mistakes, but I can't lose you. You're my daughter." Stephanie showed me the message, her hands trembling. "What do I do?" I looked at her carefully. "Do you want to meet her?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me feels like I should, but part of me is scared she'll just try to manipulate me again." "Then go in with clear boundaries," I suggested. "If she crosses them, walk away." Stephanie nodded, her resolve hardening. "You're right. I'll do it." The Confrontation, Chicago, Illinois, October 17th, 2023, 7 p.m. Stephanie agreed to meet Lucy at a neutral location, a small cafe downtown. I stayed behind but told her to call if she needed me. She walked in to find Lucy already seated, her manicured hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. Lucy looked up as Stephanie approached, her expression a mixture of relief and nervousness. "Stephanie," she said softly, "thank you for coming." "I'm here to talk," Stephanie said firmly, sitting down. "But this isn't going to be like before. If you try to manipulate me, I'm leaving." Lucy blinked, clearly taken aback. "I'm not trying to manipulate you," she said quickly. "I just want to fix this." "Then start by admitting what you've done," Stephanie said. Lucy hesitated, her eyes darting to the table. "I've made mistakes," she said carefully. "That's not enough," Stephanie said, her voice steady. "You've controlled me, gaslit me, tried to sabotage my relationship. You need to own up to that." Lucy's jaw tightened. "I didn't sabotage anything. I was trying to protect you from making bad choices." "By tearing me down?" Stephanie countered. "By making me doubt myself? That's not protection, Mom. That's control." Lucy's facade cracked, and for a moment, her voice softened. "I was scared, Stephanie. Scared of losing you. Scared you'd end up hurt or unhappy, or—" She trailed off, her eyes glistening with tears. Stephanie's expression softened slightly, but her resolve remained. "You don't protect someone by breaking them, Mom. You don't love someone by controlling them." Lucy reached across the table, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to be any other way." Stephanie stared at her mother's outstretched hand for a long moment before shaking her head. "Then I can't be around you. Not until you learn." Lucy's hand dropped to the table, and her shoulders slumped. "You mean that?" "I do," Stephanie said, standing. "I love you, Mom, but I need to love myself too." A new beginning. When Stephanie returned to the apartment, she looked drained but determined. "How did it go?" I asked gently. "She said she was scared," Stephanie said, sinking onto the couch beside me. "But she wouldn't take real responsibility for what she's done. So I told her I needed space. I took her hand in mine." "That was brave of you." Stephanie nodded, her eyes misty. "It was hard, but it was the right thing to do." For the first time, Stephanie was free. Free to live her life without the shadow of her mother's control. Free to define her own happiness. And for the first time, I knew we had a real chance at building something lasting, together.